They said the men were chosen for honor, the 100 strongest and most handsome in all of Babylon. Yet when they emerged from the queen's bedchamber, they were not men anymore. They staggered out pale and trembling, their eyes unfocused, their bodies already beginning to fail. Within hours, every last one was dead. And the queen? She was untouched, calm, silent, her beauty undisturbed, as though she had simply enjoyed a quiet night's sleep. The palace healers were baffled. No plague they knew moved this fast. No poison they had ever seen acted with such precision. The event was whispered about for centuries, a night so dark that even the bravest storytellers would lower their voices when they spoke of it. What happened in that chamber? Was it sorcery, a ritual murder, or something older, stranger, and infinitely more dangerous? Some said the queen had ceased to be human that night, that whatever had walked into the chamber as a woman had walked out as something else entirely. The truth, as it would be pieced together by survivors and fragments of hidden records, was far worse than anyone dared imagine. This wasn't rage, nor madness. It was methodical, planned with the cold precision of an architect building a monument. Months of preparation went into what history would later call the most deliberate mass sacrifice of the ancient world. The story begins with a boy named Theron, just 19 years old, a slave, born with nothing, who believed fortune had finally smiled on him. He had been chosen by the queen herself. He was moved into the palace, given fine clothes, meals of the richest grains and fruits, daily baths in scented oils brought from distant lands. The servants told him he was blessed, that his future would be forever changed. Theron wasn't alone. 99 others had been selected just like him. For 3 months, they lived as princes. But what they didn't know, what they could never have guessed, was that they were being prepared, not honored. They were not guests in the palace. They were ingredients. The selection process had begun half a year earlier. Records, still preserved on ancient tablets, detail the queen's exact requirements. Young men between 16 and 22, each in perfect health, each a virgin, and each, this part was critical, an orphan. No family to ask questions. No one to mourn. The royal assessors scoured the slave markets and farthest provinces, measuring height, inspecting teeth, even cataloguing birthmarks. The chosen few were spirited away to the palace, never to be seen by the outside world again. Inside, they were kept in a secluded wing. Their diet was controlled with scientific precision. No meat, only certain grains and herbs, some of which modern analysis suggests contained mild psychoactive compounds. The baths they took each day were more than hygiene. The oils, imported from Egypt, were part of a ritual purification. The air was thick with incense from Arabia. Music lessons, reading and writing, and endless assurances of their divine service kept them docile and devoted. Perhaps the cruelest part was the letters. They were encouraged to write about their good fortune, to carve tablets describing the honor of serving the queen. Some of those tablets survive today. Grateful, innocent words from young men who believed their lives had just begun, never realizing they were writing their own epitaphs. While they enjoyed their gilded captivity, another kind of preparation was underway. The queen's own chamber, larger than most modern houses, was being transformed. The floor was torn up and replaced with tiles of black volcanic glass, each carved with symbols that even now are difficult to look at for too long. The walls were repainted with a language older than history. Where the royal bed once stood, a single altar of black granite was placed. And the workers who did this, they were killed when the task was done, their bodies sealed within the walls to ensure no one could speak of what they had seen. When the night finally came, it was chosen with care, the spring equinox under a moonless sky. At sunset, the first young man was led into the chamber. Theron, by chance or fate, was not the first. He watched from the shadows, pretending to be lifeless, as the queen performed her work with ritual precision. She spoke in a language that no one could identify, a tongue that seemed to hum inside the skull. Each victim lasted 6 minutes. 6 minutes of ecstasy, for they believed they were ascending to join the gods, before the truth took them. The poison she used came from a plant that no longer exists, one that paralyzed without killing, leaving the mind awake inside a motionless body. 499 men, that paralysis was followed by death. For Theron, it wasn't. A quirk of his blood rendered him immune. It saved his life, though perhaps saved is the wrong word for someone who had to remain still among a growing pile of corpses, watching what came next. By the 20th victim, the queen no longer looked entirely human. The air in the chamber turned frigid, frost forming on the black tiles. Shadows began to move on their own, stretching into winged shapes. The blood from the sacrifices didn't simply pool. It flowed in deliberate lines toward the altar, as though obeying invisible hands. Outside, the guards reported hearing voices. Dozens of them. Yet only the queen was in the room. By dawn, the ritual was complete. The chamber held 99 bodies arranged in a perfect spiral. At its center sat the queen, not exhausted, but radiant. Her movements were too smooth, her eyes catching the light like an animal's. The guards who met her gaze would suffer nightmares for weeks. And somewhere, hidden deep in the palace, Theron kept the truth locked inside him, knowing that if he spoke, he would join the dead. In the days that followed, whispers rippled through the palace. Servants avoided the queen's gaze, yet could not explain why. She moved differently now, fluid, almost weightless, as though the joints in her body had been replaced with water. In the torchlight, her eyes reflected like a predator's, impossible to look at for long without feeling dizzy. And then there was her voice. At first, it was subtle. A guard ordered to open a sealed treasury door hesitated, and the queen spoke a single syllable. His hands moved before he could stop them. A priest who refused to hand over a sacred text felt his own arms betray him, passing the scroll into her hands as if they no longer belonged to him. Even a palace scribe, trying to record her activities in secret, found his stylus scratching praises of her name instead. It was as if the very sound of her voice rewrote the will of anyone who heard it. Her power didn't end there. Shadows inside the palace began to misbehave. They stretched and twisted independently of the light, sometimes holding their shape even in complete darkness. Servants claimed they saw hands reach from the walls to silence those who spoke ill of her. Others swore they saw shadowy figures standing guard outside her chamber when no physical guards were posted. The palace astronomer, obsessed with understanding the phenomenon, went mad after claiming the shadows had depth, like looking into a bottomless well that stared back. She no longer touched the food from the royal kitchens. For weeks, her meals were left untouched, yet her body showed no signs of hunger. What she did consume, no one saw. The feeding ceremonies were conducted in secret by a small circle of priests who swore oaths of silence. Those who broke them were found shriveled, their bodies unnaturally dry, their flesh collapsing inward as though something had drained every drop of life from them. Modern analysis of similar remains shows cellular damage that matches rapid, unnatural aging. She began speaking in a language no one recognized, a sound that seemed to hurt the ears and twist in the mind. Scribes attempting to write it found their hands cramping and their noses bleeding. The words contained frequencies human throats should not be able to produce, yet she spoke them with ease. Some priests claimed she conversed with the gods. Others whispered she was speaking to something older, something the gods themselves feared. As weeks turned into months, the palace began to change. Servants moved in eerie unison, turning corners at the same angle, blinking at the same moment, speaking in perfectly timed responses. The Elamite ambassador would later write that entering the Babylonian court was like stepping into a hive, where every worker shared a single mind, the queen's mind. When questioned, the servants swore nothing was wrong. Ancient texts claimed that by consuming the life force of 100 pure souls, one could transcend human limits and step into the space between mortal and divine. The queen had done exactly that. Within the palace walls, she was unstoppable. She could command your body with a word, bend your shadow to her will, and drain the years from your life with a touch. But the transformation had a cost. It didn't just change her. It began to change the city itself. It started quietly, with animals leaving the streets, cats vanishing from alleys, pigeons abandoning the rooftops. Soon, the markets were empty of goats, sheep, and cattle. Even rats fled in organized swarms, streaming toward the city gates. The ones that remained, too young, too old, or trapped, were dead within days, not from hunger or disease, but as if the city itself had become poisonous to life. Plants began to die in strange, perfect circles, starting at the palace gardens and moving outward. Each ring of destruction grew at the exact same rate, 13 cubits per day. The trees didn't wither. They turned to ash where they stood, their leaves crumbling between the fingers of horrified gardeners. Within a month, the hanging gardens, one of the wonders of the world, were nothing but grey dust. Then the Euphrates itself began to rebel. For 3 days, the river ran backward, surging upstream with enough force to capsize boats. The water grew dark and thick, so cold it caused frostbite in the desert heat. Fish floated to the surface, their bodies rotting in minutes. When the current returned to normal, it carried strange things, plants with eyes, stones that whispered, and creatures no fisherman could name. And then came the dead. At first, only those involved in preparing the ritual saw them. Silent, watchful young men, each with a clean slit across the throat. They stood in corners, appeared in doorways, vanished when approached. Soon, the sightings spread to every part of the city. Children drew them before their parents ever saw them. No matter where they appeared, they followed the same pattern as the bodies had been arranged that night in the queen's chamber, a great spiral spreading outward from the palace. By the time all 100 had manifested, they formed a ghostly map over Babylon itself, each one watching, each one silent. The city could no longer sleep. Thousands suffered the same nightmare, standing in a dark chamber, surrounded by those 100 dead men, unable to move or speak as something unseen drew closer from the shadows. Children woke screaming at exactly 3:33 every night. Adults learned to fear sleep itself. The palace had become the queen's domain, but now the city was becoming her shadow. The truth, when it finally surfaced, was almost more unsettling than the curse itself. All of it, the 100 sacrifices, the ritual, the transformation, had been done for love, not for power's sake alone, not for greed or conquest, but for her son. His name was Adad-nirari. He was 10 years old when his father, King Shamshiadad, died suddenly, leaving a child on the throne of the most powerful city in the known world. In the ancient Near East, a boy king might as well have been a beacon to every enemy within 1,000 miles, an invitation to invade, assassinate, or rebel. Babylon was surrounded by vultures in human form, rival generals claiming the throne by divine right, enemy armies massing at the borders, whispers of civil war echoing through the marble halls. Inside the palace, the nobles sharpened their daggers, some figurative, some not. Priests muttered about divine disapproval. In their eyes, a child could not perform the sacred duties of kingship without disaster. To them, his reign was illegitimate, and in those days, an illegitimate ruler risked not just political collapse, but cosmic punishment. A mother in her position might have chosen flight. She might have bargained with the generals or married her son into the safety of another kingdom. But this was no ordinary mother. She had ruled beside her husband, had led armies, and had tasted the full extent of power. Retreat was unthinkable. Compromise was weakness. The only path was to make herself so feared that no one would dare touch her child. Somewhere in the restricted vaults of the royal library, she found a different kind of weapon. Ancient tablets, written long before her time, spoke of kings and queens who had transcended mortality, beings who could command life and death. The cost was unbearable, but the reward was absolute. 4 months she planned in secret. She consulted priests from Egypt, sorcerers from distant India, shamans from the northern steppes. Each offered fragments of forbidden knowledge, pieces of a ritual meant to transform flesh and soul into something beyond human. She didn't rush. She tested smaller versions of the sacrifice, refining every detail. How much blood was needed? What herbs would keep a victim calm? Which incantations drew the strongest reaction from whatever listened in the dark? The number 100 was no accident. It was exact. Enough life to bridge the gap between mortal and divine. During the day, she played the part of the loving mother, teaching her son the art of rule, playing games with him, commissioning portraits of them together. She wrote letters for him to open on future birthdays, gifts to remind him that she was always protecting him. At night, she orchestrated the most precise killing in Babylon's history. The contrast was so sharp it bordered on madness. A woman who could spend hours laughing with her child while planning mass murder before dawn. When the ritual was complete, its effects were immediate. The rival generals abandoned their claims. One fled, one hid in the priesthood, and the third was found dead in circumstances that defied explanation. The Elamite armies at the border retreated without battle. Their king, claiming visions, had warned him not to invade. Nobles who had plotted against the boy suddenly became his most loyal servants, confessing to crimes they had not been accused of, begging forgiveness for offenses they could not name. Her son's throne was safe. No one would dare raise a hand against him, not with a mother who could kill with a word and command shadows to do her bidding. But safety came at a price the boy would pay in ways he could never understand. Years later, as a man, he would write about those dark days, remembering his mother's face after the ritual, how he could no longer meet her eyes without feeling cold, how her voice seemed to carry echoes of other voices, how the air around her felt heavy, wrong. He spoke of her fierce protection, but also of a fear he never fully escaped. And still, he accepted it. In one surviving tablet, he wrote, "My mother gave up her humanity so I might keep mine. I reign because she was willing to become what others could not face." In the ancient world, this was the highest form of maternal duty. To protect a child's future by any means necessary was not only acceptable, it was expected. There were stories of mothers selling themselves into slavery to feed their children, mothers killing to protect them, mothers making bargains with the gods or with darker things. To those who heard the tale, Semiramis had simply taken the logic to its ultimate conclusion. If power protected a child, then absolute power was the only guarantee. If fear kept enemies away, then supernatural fear was the perfect shield. And if sacrifice brought divine favor, then the ultimate sacrifice, her humanity, would bring divine favor without end. It was a logic trap, one that has ensnared parents in every era. Many would call it monstrous. She would call it love. For a time, Babylon endured its queen's reign of shadows. The dead still haunted the streets, the gardens were gone, the river still whispered in the night. Yet the people learned to live with it. They had no choice. What is a haunting compared to the wrath of a god? But the priests did not forget. In the great temples, far from the queen's gaze, the high priest of Marduk began to whisper a dangerous thought, that she was no goddess at all, but an abomination, that her existence threatened not just Babylon, but the cosmic order itself. And when the cosmic order is in danger, The gods expect their servants to act. The problem was that their target was no ordinary ruler. She could command minds with her voice. Her shadow could kill. She was surrounded by 100 loyal ghosts and an entire city that moved as an extension of her will. No mortal court could touch her. But the priests were not planning a mortal trial. Their preparations took months. Messages were carried in code, hidden in temple chants. Meetings were held not in person but in dreams, through shared rituals that allowed the conspirators to speak beyond the reach of her mind. Representatives came from every major temple in Mesopotamia, priests of Marduk, Ishtar, Shamash, and lesser gods long forgotten. Even foreign holy men were smuggled into the city: Egyptian scribes of Thoth, Hittite storm priests, shadowed figures from the Indus Valley. It was the first and only time in history that so many faiths united for a single purpose: the judgment of a queen. The case they built was unlike anything Babylon had ever seen. They gathered eyewitness testimony from the one man who had survived the ritual, Theron, hidden deep in the catacombs of a temple, his story carved onto 17 tablets. They collected physical evidence: black glass tiles still etched with forbidden symbols, plant matter turned to ash while still alive, water taken from the Euphrates during its reverse flow. But physical evidence was not enough. They also gathered what they called proof from the other side: sacred flames that burned black, oracle bones that cracked into words of accusation, celestial omens seen in the night sky. The priests believed the gods themselves had joined the prosecution. But how to summon her? How to bring into a court someone who could enslave your mind with a breath? They found her one weakness: her son. The boy she had damned herself to protect was now nearly a man, and she still came whenever he called. A religious ceremony was arranged under the pretext of blessing his upcoming marriage negotiations. Every stone of the great ziggurat was lined with protective wards, meteoric iron carved with runes, salt from the primordial seas, the blood of willing sacrifices. The entire temple became a trap. When she entered, the air itself changed. The temperature plummeted, frost blooming on stone. Shadows slithered like snakes across the walls. She spoke a few words, and 7 priests collapsed, blood pouring from their ears. Her voice shattered pottery throughout the temple complex and caused pregnant women miles away to miscarry. But the assembled clergy were ready. Speaking in perfect unison, they chanted counter-harmonies that bound her power, their voices weaving a cage of sound around her. The trial began. It was less a legal proceeding than a battle between realities. Witnesses swore the statue of Marduk wept blood. The sacred flames of Shamash burned cold and black. And then the ghosts arrived, not drifting in one by one, but all together, filling the space with a silent accusation no words could match. Even she, who had faced armies without fear, seemed to falter. The priests debated crimes that had never existed before: the attempted corruption of reality, the consumption of souls with malice, the wounding of the barrier between life and death. Could someone who had transcended mortality be bound by mortal law? And if they could not, then what justice was possible? After 3 days, the verdict came. Death was not enough. Death meant nothing to someone who had consumed 100 souls. Instead, they decreed total annihilation, the destruction of body, soul, and memory, erased from existence so completely that no resurrection would be possible. The sentence would be carried out by sacred fire, not of one flame but 7, each from a different god, each designed to burn away a different part of her being. The execution would be public, a warning to all who might attempt such blasphemy. Even the gods, it would say, have limits. The great courtyard of Babylon was transformed into an altar of fire. Thousands gathered, crowding rooftops and temple steps, drawn by a mixture of terror and morbid fascination. In the center stood a towering pyre built from 7 kinds of sacred wood: cedar from Lebanon for purification, sandalwood from India for spirit binding, olive wood soaked in holy oil for divine judgment, and others, each brought from a temple grove watered with blessed water for generations. The logs were arranged to mirror the constellations as they had appeared on the night of the original ritual, a celestial trap built in wood and flame. The air was heavy with the scent of incense and blood. Priests had spent months crafting the oils that would feed the fire, each ingredient prepared through ritual. Water from 7 sacred rivers, the tears of the innocent, blood freely given by willing supplicants. Every detail was meant to ensure not just her death, but her unmaking. She was brought forward in chains of divine light, her bare feet silent against the stone. The wards shimmered faintly around her, their glow distorting the air. For a moment, it looked as if she might break them. Her voice of command swelled in her throat, and several priests staggered, blood dripping from their ears, but the barrier held. And then they forced her son to step forward. The priests had known this would be the final lock on her prison. Only Adad Nirari, the child she had damned herself to protect, could speak the words that bound her completely. His hands trembled as he recited the ritual phrases, tears streaming down his face. She looked at him the entire time, smiling, not in mockery, but with something that might have been pride. When he spoke the last word, the chains tightened, and her body convulsed as light wrapped around her like molten metal. The pyre was lit. The flames rose so fast they seemed to leap for her. They burned hot enough to warp the bronze fittings of the temple doors. The heat cracked the stones of the courtyard, yet the priests standing within arm's reach were untouched. What burned was not ordinary fire. It was a conflagration aimed at the soul. Her screams were not human. They were layered, filled with harmonics that tore through the air like blades. Birds fell dead from the sky. Men collapsed clutching their heads, blood pouring from their noses. Women miscarried where they stood. Worse than the physical effects were the things the screams carried, raw meaning forced directly into the mind. Prophecies of doom. Curses that would cling to bloodlines for generations. Secrets so alien and vast that some listeners went mad on the spot. Shapes appeared in the flames, faces of the 100 dead, shadowed creatures older than human memory, glimpses of strange, otherworldly landscapes. For 3 days and nights, the fire consumed her, the priests feeding it fresh wood as if the pyre were a living thing that could never be satisfied. When at last the flames died, the executioners approached to gather the ashes. What they found made them recoil in horror. There was no ash. Where her bones should have been lay something black and glimmering, harder than any metal, yet clear as crystal. The pieces pulsed faintly with warmth, as though still alive, and when the priests drew close, they heard whispers, not with their ears, but inside their skulls. The bones bled when cut, the blood crystallizing instantly into sharp fragments. They were growing, slowly but undeniably, as if they were seeds. Every attempt to destroy them failed. Cast into the Euphrates, they returned to shore. Buried, they caused the ground to bleed and quake. Broken apart, the fragments crawled back together across miles of land. Ground into dust, each grain became a perfect, tiny replica of the whole. They realized too late that the sacred fire had not destroyed her. It had changed her. When the horror of it settled over them, the priests understood the truth. They had not killed their queen. They had stripped away the last traces of her humanity and left behind something worse, something that could not die. Destruction was no longer the goal. Containment became the only option. The foreign priests who had joined the trial drew upon their own traditions, piecing together a strategy that blended the faiths of many lands. 7 containers were forged from meteoric iron, each carved inside and out with protective symbols from a different religion. Runes of binding from the north, wards from the Nile, spirals from the Indus Valley, signs of the storm god from the Hittites, and more. Every line was etched in ritual. Every stroke meant to cage not just matter, but spirit. The bones were divided carefully, each piece sealed into its own container so that no fragment could call to another. The priests performed rites that lasted for days, breaking only to bathe in sacred waters before resuming the chants. When the final lid was hammered shut, the courtyard fell silent for the first time since the execution began. But the containers were not meant to hold her forever. They were only to buy time. Time for the world to find a way to end her completely. That was nearly 3,000 years ago. No one has found that way. Over the centuries, the 7 prisons changed hands. Temples became shrines. Shrines became ruins. The ruins became museums, private collections, and eventually, mysteries. Today, no one knows exactly where the containers are, but the stories never stopped. In some remote monastery, a relic said to whisper in the voice of a queen is kept under constant prayer. In a private vault in Europe, a black crystal fragment reportedly causes hallucinations and insomnia in anyone who sleeps nearby. In the Middle East, there are whispered accounts of an artifact that warms in the hand and leaves the skin marked with patterns no one can explain. If the legends are true, all 7 pieces are still out there, still warm, still growing, still whispering in a language older than mankind. The historical records name her Shamuramat, a real queen of Assyria who ruled as regent around 810 BCE. Archaeology confirms her existence. Inscriptions, tablets, and monuments bear her name. But the rest of the story, the transformation, the curse, the unkillable remains, that exists in the borderland between history and nightmare, where the lines blur and no one can quite separate fact from legend. Some say the myth of Semiramis is just that, a myth. Others believe it was a desperate attempt to record something real in words the human mind could tolerate. Because sometimes, truth is too dangerous to tell plainly. Sometimes it's buried under centuries of story, so that only fragments slip through. And if those fragments in their 7 iron prisons are real, then one day, somewhere, someone might open one. And when they do, the queen who could not die will wake again. Her name still lingers in history books. Shamuramat, carved in stone, etched into tablets, standing on weathered monuments. Historians will tell you she was a regent, a queen who ruled in her son's name, who led armies and shaped an empire. What they won't tell you is that some believe fragments of her still exist. Whispering. The legend refuses to fade. Greek and Roman writers repeated the same strange details. The spiral of 100 sacrifices, the way her body never turned to ash, the transformation no fire could undo. And archaeology has a habit of brushing too close to the story. In 1962, a dig in Iraq uncovered a spiral burial of nearly 100 young men, all dead at the same time. Soil samples at the center showed strange chemical traces. The site was shut down within days. The reports vanished. In 2011, a sealed chamber in Syria, covered wall to wall with symbols matching ancient accounts of her ritual, was destroyed before it could be studied. In 2019, radar scans at Nimrud revealed a hidden chamber beneath the palace, exactly the size the legends describe. No one has dared open it. Some say it's all misogyny, ancient men twisting the story of a powerful woman. But this isn't the usual witch queen tale. Semiramis is never cast down or humiliated. She doesn't fall, she ascends. The story doesn't erase her achievements. It makes them inhuman. If this was meant as an insult, it failed. Maybe it wasn't a warning at all. Maybe it was a record, a way of writing down an event so horrific that it had to be wrapped in myth just to be told at all. And if that's true, then the 7 containers are not legend. They are real, and they are still out there. Theron, the only one who survived that night, spent his life trying to make people believe him. He died alone, raving about shadows, voices, and the look in the queen's eyes as she became something that could no longer be called human. One line of his testimony survives. 100 lives for one throne, a city's soul for a child's safety. Her love was the sharpest blade of all. It's comforting to think we're better now, that we've evolved past the horrors of the ancient world. But give someone absolute power, threaten what they love most, and see how quickly morality rots. The only difference is that today, we've forgotten how to turn love into a weapon like hers. Probably because somewhere, in 7 forgotten places, pieces of her still wait. Still warm, still growing, still whispering to anyone who will listen. And if the wrong person answers, it won't just repeat history. It will finish it. If you've been pulled into this story, imagine how much darker the rest of history might be. There are other queens, other rulers, whose stories were buried for a reason. I'll be bringing you those too, so hit like if you were hooked. Drop a comment telling me which ancient ruler you think was even worse than Semiramis, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next historical nightmare. Because every myth started as someone's truth, and some truths never die.